Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great, I can see people nodding. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to do this presentation, which is a celebration of World Migratory Bird Day. Sorry, I have to say migratory. I still can't get used to saying migratory. So let's see, how do I get to the next slide? There we go. So this is the outline of what I'm going to talk about this evening. I'll be talking about why birds actually migrate, the different flyways that they use in the United States, and how they actually go about migrating. How do they navigate these large distances? And what are the physical changes that they undergo when they migrate? Also, a little bit of information about climate change and its effect on migration. And then I'll move on to the more fun stuff, which is the variety of bird species that can be seen in Lake County during migration. And I will share some experiences of my bird monitoring when I was in Lake County, monitoring several different migratory bird species. And finally, I'll finish off with how you can help migratory birds in your own yards. So for those of you that don't know me, I actually moved from the US, from Sweden. I spent 2 years in Sweden, and I moved from Sweden to the US at the end of 2012. In 2014, I started volunteering for the Lake County Forest Preserve, and that's where I met Glenn Moss, who you can see here, and we did lots of habitat restoration at Old School Forest Preserve. And it was through meeting Glenn here that I became involved with Lake County Audubon and joined the board. I eventually became president in 2018. So World Migratory Bird Day is an annual event, and it always takes place on the second Saturday in May. There's a different theme each year, and this year's theme is Sing, Fly, Soar Like a Bird. And really it's to it's a campaign to raise awareness of the need to protect migratory birds and the habitats that they need to survive. So why do birds migrate? Well, it's quite simple. There's just two main reasons. The first is to find food, and the second is to find suitable habitat for breeding. And migration is driven by changes in hormone levels related to changing day length, a reduction in temperatures, and also a reduction in the availability of food. So there are 4 different flyways in the US: the Atlantic, which is shown in blue, the Mississippi Flyway, which actually goes through Illinois, the Central Flyway, and also the Pacific Flyway. And it's really quite staggering the distances that some of these birds undergo when they migrate. Probably the most striking example is the bird shown here, which is an Arctic tern, which migrates 50,000 miles every single year, which is just staggering when you think of the size of these birds. So how do birds actually migrate? Well, they have evolved a suite of navigational tools that they use, which are kind of like their GPS or satellite navigation. And I'm just going to go through some information on some of these things. So it's thought that migration is under genetic control. And they discovered this from using a study on this particular bird, which is a European bird, can be seen in the UK. It's called a blackcap. And there was 2 different populations of this bird. One that always migrated in a southwesterly direction, and the other which migrated in a southeasterly direction. When they bred these two different populations, they found that the offspring of these birds migrated south, so right between the two roots of the parents, suggesting that that navigation was under genetic control. So how do birds find their way? Homing pigeons have probably been studied the most, and when a pigeon leaves home, it creates a map of its surroundings. So it remembers things like landmarks, different buildings and roads, and it uses this map to find its way back home. And then out of sight of home, it will switch to its physiological GPS systems. So birds use the sun to orient themselves via an internal clock. And they have 3 of these internal clocks, 1 in the retina and 2 in different areas of the brain. And they use the position of the sun in the sky to orient themselves. In studies where they clock shifted birds, which means that they put them in a room that was light when it should have been dark outside, or vice versa, when they let the birds out, they headed in the wrong direction. So if they would been clock shifted by 6 hours, they would head 90 degrees in the wrong direction. Not all birds migrate during the day. In fact, the majority of them migrate at night, and they use the stars to do this. So they learn maps based on the position of major constellations and their position relative to the poles. And they work this out by showing birds simulations of the northern hemisphere sky. And in the spring, these birds would orientate themselves north and orientate themselves south in the fall. And they do the opposite if they're presented with the southern hemisphere. So birds also have a magnetic sense, and this is probably the reason why they're capable of migrating such huge distances. This was confirmed in the 1970s when they looked at homing pigeons, and they attached magnets to the beak of a homing pigeon and found that it could not find its way home. And they actually have tiny particles of iron, which are called magnetite, in their beak. And these act as receptors and respond to changes in magnetic direction. And they also have magnetic receptors in the eye, and these are called cryptochromes. And again, these respond to changes in magnetic direction. So what about the physical changes? Migration obviously is a very challenging thing for a bird to do. And in order to make it such long distances, they need to double their body weight. And they do this by eating large amounts and putting on fat. In order to make room for all this fat, they actually transform their internal organs. So they're capable of shrinking some of their internal organs. Although they do increase the heart and also chest muscles to enable them to fly such large distances. They reduce the amount of time that they're asleep, so they just sleep for a few seconds at a time, and they're able to keep half of their brain active so as to avoid colliding into anything when they're flying and looking out for predators. If they burn through all their fat reserves, they can also consume muscle as well as a fuel. And then when the migration is finished, they need to revert back to their previous form. So in the pictures here, this is a hummingbird, and you can see here it's normal south, and then in the fall, just before it migrates south again, you can see it's got really quite fat. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about climate change. Audubon brought out a bird and climate change report in 2019, which was called Survival by Degrees. And it actually said that 389 bird species were on the brink of extinction due to climate change. You can actually go to their website and you can put in your zip code and see what effects are likely to happen in your area. So it will show you things like wildfires, drought, flooding, that kind of thing. Climate change has a big effect on, or can have a big effect on, migratory birds. And this is because it causes habitat loss, also a lack of food. So as things warm up, the food that birds use, such as caterpillars to feed their young, these caterpillars hatch much earlier in the year. So the caterpillars have kind of been and gone by the time that the young birds are, have hatched and need feeding. So this is one of the Audubon's maps. They've mapped what will happen for a lot of different bird species. This is a grassland bird, and it shows its summer range over these different years. And what you can see from these maps is that although there's an increased range, the actual summer range is shrinking, and it's predicted to shrink by 80%. And actually this bird would disappear from Lake County altogether by 2050. With the tree swallow, it's a similar thing. The summer range is moving north, and as the winter range, they're spending their winters further north and inland as well. You might think, well, this is not a problem, but if the birds move north, it might not be the same kind of habitat for them. So there might just not be the conditions that they need to survive. So we can all take small actions to reduce greenhouse gases, and this will make a big difference. So it's predicted that if we held the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, then 76% of vulnerable species would be much better off, and 150 species would no longer be vulnerable to extinction. There's things that everyone can do to help. So the average US person actually produces 50,000 pounds of CO2 every single year. So you can try and reduce your carbon footprint. If you go to this website here, that will give you ideas to do that. And then you can try and protect important bird habitat and help the birds in your yard. And I'm going to talk more about this later on. And of course, you should support your local Audubon chapter who's working hard to protect the migratory birds. So that was all quite serious. I'm now going to move on to the more fun stuff. I'm going to talk about where you can see particular migratory bird species, where I think the best places are to go birding in Lake County, and what are the range of migratory bird species that can be seen in Lake County. So eBird is a really fantastic tool. It's not just for bird geeks like myself. It's great if you're planning a vacation. You can go up here to the Explore Data tab, put in the region that you're going to, and it will bring up a list of birds that you can see and recent sightings. So It's really great, and I used to use eBird all the time, not just for my bird monitoring, but every bird walk I went on, I entered the data into eBird. And it's very easy now, as there is an eBird app, so you can kind of do it as you're on your bird walk. These are the birding hotspots from eBird in Lake County. So those with the red star, such as Waukegan Beach, have the highest species counts on eBird, with over 200 species that have been recorded. And those with the blue star, such as Wright Woods, have been designated important bird areas by National Audubon. So I had a few favourite places to go birding. Old School Forest Preserve was just 5 minutes walk from my house, and I spent so much time there doing habitat restoration, butterfly monitoring, bluebird monitoring, purple martin monitoring. It was like my second home, and I found it great for birding. It's several different mixed habitats there, so there's a wide range of birds that can be seen. Ryerson Woods is probably the best place in Lake County to see warblers. We had an amazing day there on an Audubon walk where we saw 19 different species of warblers in one morning. It's also really nice to go there in the fall. The colours are spectacular, and the spring wildflowers are really beautiful there as well. So this is Wright Woods, and that's probably one of my favourite places to go for the fall colours with the maple trees. It's also really, really good for warblers as well along the river. Middle Fork Savannah is a very special place. It's actually supposed to be one of the highest quality tall grass savannas in the whole of the US. There's lots of different habitats there, also the river, and several different pools, so you do get water birds there as well. Fort Sheridan is along the lake, so that is very good for migratory birds that are passing along the lakefront. They actually have a hawk watch there in the spring and fall, which is very good to go to. And Illinois Beach State Park is actually #1 in eBird. It has over 300 different species of birds that have been sighted there. And last but not least, of course, Waukegan Beach, which is second only to Illinois Beach State Park in the number of bird species that can be seen there. It really is a very special place with a unique habitat of dune and swale, and the water as well. So it does attract a very large variety of birds, and also some endangered species that I'll talk about later. So just before I go on to talk about the migratory birds that you can see in Lake County, I should point out that not all birds migrate. So it's thought overall that around 40% of bird species migrate. So there's plenty of birds that you can see that are here all year round and that you can help in your yard, such as the black-capped chickadee and the nuthatch. Several different species of woodpecker, such as the red-bellied woodpecker, which it does have a slight kind of tinge of red on the belly. Also the downy woodpecker and the very similar looking hairy woodpecker. These are birds that you will often see on your feeders. And of course the blue jay, which probably everyone is familiar with. And anyone that knows me knows I'm obsessed with owls, so I had to include a few owls in here. So there are actually 8 different species of owl that you can see in Illinois, most of which are resident. There are some that migrate through, such as the short-eared and long-eared owl and the northern saw-whet owl, which you can see in the winter months. So if we move on now to look at the migratory bird species, With the ducks, there's around 30 different species of ducks that migrate through. And these can often be seen in the winter months, so they come and spend the winter here, such as the red-breasted merganser. This particular bird is a female. The blue-winged teal does spend the summers here, and in this particular photo, the one with the blue with its wings stretched out is a male, and that's the female that's just behind. This bird is a common loon, and the best month to see these birds is April time. Just head to any lakes in the area, or also the lakefront. I've even seen them in the harbour at Waukegan as well. And then they head north, breed up in Canada. Several different species of heron that can be seen, these two here, and also the green heron. Probably the great blue heron is the most common, and you'll see these, they spend the summer here and they breed in large rookeries. There used to be a large rookery at Almond Marsh, but sadly a lot of the dead trees that they were building their nests on got blown down, so the rookery is much smaller now, but you can still see these birds here. Also at Almond Marsh and other areas with water, you're likely to see great egrets as well, which is a very striking bird. Probably most people are familiar with the sandhill cranes as well. Quite often in the fall, you'll hear these birds before you see them. They migrate in these large flocks, and you can hear kind of their rolling call from large distances away. Quite often you'll look up and just see little specks in the sky, but they can be heard from a long distance away. But they do actually breed in Lake County. These two photographs were taken, the left one was taken at Volley Bog, and the right-hand one was taken at Illinois Beach State Park. And these were two really kind of lucky shots where the birds just kind of either walked out or flew out next to me, and I just managed to snap the pictures. Raptors do actually migrate as well, but there are resident red-tailed hawks and Cooper's hawks. But there will be also migratory red-tailed hawks and Cooper's hawks that move through in the spring and fall. As I mentioned earlier, there are hawk watches that count these migratory raptors. So there's the one at Fort Sheridan, also Illinois Beach State Park. And I highly recommend you look up information on these hawk watches and go along one day. It's really quite impressive how they can identify these teeny specks in the sky and say, oh yes, that's a Cooper's hawk. So it makes an interesting outing. The broad-winged hawk is one that migrates through Lake County, and actually in the fall you'll often see what are called kettles, which are large groups of these birds, and they'll just be kind of circling in the sky above, often in large numbers, 200 or 300 at a time, which is quite impressive. And then the turkey vulture can be seen from around about March through to November. It stays quite late before it migrates, and that bird obviously feeds on carrion. So I'll now move on to talk about the shorebirds. There's several different species, some which are resident during the summer and some which pass through. So the spotted sandpiper is one that does stay for the summer months and does breed here. Both of these photos were taken at Waukegan Beach, and it's very good to see shorebirds that are passing through in April. And also in August as well, they will be moving back south again. The piping plover, which I'll talk about more later on. This bird here is actually what is called the broken wing display. So this is when they perceive a threat to their nest. They will pretend they have a broken wing so that they draw away the predator. And then this funny looking bird on the right is a woodcock. And these birds actually come back in April time. And if you get a chance, sometimes the Forest Preserve does woodcock walks. And they have this really quite spectacular mating display where the males fly up in the air and then come circling down, making really bizarre noises that sound nothing like a bird, and actually to me sounded a bit like R2-D2. So it's well worth going to see that. Although these are shorebirds, you won't actually see them along the shore. They're very secretive birds and they kind of hide in the long grasses. But both of these birds do breed in Lake County. The killdeer is probably the most common shorebird that you can see in Lake County, and it does actually breed here. Here is evidence of that. There's a very cute little fuzzball is the young killdeer. And the terns I'll talk more about later on. These are two more unusual shorebirds, so you might not see these every year. The American avocet, which is this really elegant, beautiful looking bird, and the willet as well, which are often seen in flocks. I just got lucky one day when I called in at Waukegan Beach, and these birds happened to be on the beach. So unfortunately, I didn't have my camera. So I had to rush home, grab the camera, come back again. But luckily they were still there, so I could get these photos of them. There's only one species of hummingbird that is seen regularly in Lake County, although there are some kind of more rare ones that are seen occasionally, but the ruby-throated hummingbird can be seen every year and it does breed in Lake County. This one is a female. The male has a red patch on its throat. And these birds feed on nectar. Here you can see it feeding on native plant, which is liatris. There are a couple of different migratory species of woodpecker. The red-headed woodpecker does actually breed in Lake County. These birds really declined, but in recent years look like they're having more success. There's been a lot more sightings of them, and it's possible that some of these birds may actually be staying through the winter months now. And then the yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is one of my absolute favorites. I remember on a bird walk seeing this bird for the first time and being so excited, just shouting out sapsucker, and then looking around to make sure that nobody had seen the crazy lady shouting out. But these are not like typical woodpeckers. They don't drum on the trees. You might be able to make out these small holes in the top of the tree, and they actually kind of drill into the trees and feed on the sap that comes out. There are several different species of flycatcher. This shows 3 different ones. The least flycatcher, which is very similar to 3 other species of flycatcher: the Acadian flycatcher, the alder flycatcher, and the willow flycatcher. Very, very similar looking. The least flycatcher is smaller than those 3, so you can often identify that. But the only way to kind of really tell between the others is with their different songs. The great crested flycatcher is the largest species of flycatcher. It can breed in Lake County, and it will occupy nest boxes. and it has an unusual habit of adding snake skin into its nest. People are not quite sure why they add the snake skin. It's thought maybe to deter predators. And the final bird on this slide is the eastern phoebe. And these birds, their song is quite easy to remember because they actually say their name. So it just says Phoebe, Phoebe. And you'll often see these birds nesting under bridges. The bridge at Wright Woods always has a pair of phoebes that nest under the bridge. Other birds that feed on insects as well, the eastern kingbird, shown here on the left, is a black and white bird, and you can often identify it by its tail. Looks like it's the end of it has been dipped in white paint. And these feed on insects. You can see here that these two recent fledglings are fighting over a dragonfly. The other bird is a blue-grey gnatcatcher that they also breed in Lake County, and this is a recent fledgling that I took this photo at Old School Forest Preserve. These two birds are vireos. There's several different species of vireo. The red-eyed vireo does breed in Lake County, whereas the Philadelphia vireo passes through and breeds further north up in Canada. Both of these birds are feeding on berries in the fall. Normally they would be much higher up in the trees, but in the fall they'll come down and feed on the berries so that they can fatten up for migration. Several different species of swallow. This is the barn swallow. And these birds breed in Lake County. This is a photo of 3 recent fledglings. And they actually nest under the eaves of buildings, and they make their nest from mud. So you can see in this picture here all the little dabs of mud, and it's thought that this bird might have to construct this by flying backwards and forwards several hundred times to construct this nest. The tree swallow is another species of swallow that breeds in Lake County. The top picture here is the male with the blue coloration, and the female has more of a brown coloration. These birds will actually nest in nest boxes. They're cavity nesters, and they do compete with the eastern bluebirds for the nest boxes. So one of the nest boxes that I was monitoring here shows some young tree swallows in there. So we let the tree swallows nest in the bluebird boxes, but any invasive species such as the house sparrow, we take the eggs out because these birds will actually kill the tree swallows and bluebirds. The kinglets are probably one of the smallest migratory birds that can be seen. You often see them hanging upside down from branches and leaves. This is a ruby crown kinglet. You can just about see the red on the top of his head. When he gets agitated or is displaying, he will raise up this crown and the red will be a lot more visible. There's also the golden crown kinglet that can be seen as well. Oops. This acrobatic bird is a grey catbird, and this species of bird is so named because of its call, so it does make a mewing call like a cat. And if you hear a whole jumble of noises coming from a shrub and some mewing noises, it's most likely a catbird. Here you can see the bird is feeding on sumac. So the warblers are just absolutely stunning. I never got over quite how beautiful they were. Every year I was always shocked by the colours of them. There's 36 different species of warbler that can be seen in Lake County. And in the springtime when they pass through, peak is probably around the middle of May. and they're in their bright breeding plumage at this time. And then when they pass through again in the fall, their peak is around about mid-September, and they're in much kind of drabber colours at this time. So a lot of these birds come from South America, and they will pass through. There are a few species that breed in Lake County, but most will pass through and breed much further north in the Canadian boreal forest and Alaska. So these are two species that do actually breed in Lake County. So this is a common yellowthroat, and this is a male with his black mask. His call can be heard quite commonly, which sounds like witchety, witchety, witchety. And the yellow warbler is another species that breed. This is a male, you can see by the brown streaks on his chest. The Canada warbler is another very pretty one, and this is a male with the black necklace around the chest. The palm warbler is one of the more easily identified birds, as it's often low down in the trees or on the ground, and it actually pumps its tail up and down. And the final bird on here is an American redstart. This is a male with orange coloration. The females have yellow, and it actually fans its tail out. So that's one way that you can identify that one. These two beauties are the Blackburnian warbler and the magnolia warbler. And quite often these birds, you will end up getting a crick in your neck, but you get what birders call warbler neck, because these birds are always high up in the canopy of the trees and flitting around. And if you're a photographer, that's a real challenge to get decent photos of these birds, because they're moving so fast, and just as they land in one spot, they're on to the next. So just as you focus on them, they're off. So you will, if you try to photograph these birds, expect lots of twig and leaf photos. There are some species that are a bit more easy to photograph if you find them, which is the hooded warbler, because that is often low down. This one I took at Wright Woods when it was along by the river. And then the yellow rump warbler is probably the commonest warbler that you'll see. You will see large numbers of these. Birders affectionately call this the butterbutt, as it has this yellow patch which you can just about see at the top of the tail. This is one of my absolute favourite birds from the US, and it's a prothonotary warbler. It took me about 4 years to find one of these in Lake County. I did actually see one at Wright Woods. And these birds will nest in boxes if you put the boxes up over water. Black-throated blue warbler, black-throated green. As I said before, these birds are often up in the canopies of the trees. And the chestnut-sided warbler in recent years is thought to have been breeding at Lyons Woods. So that's a good place to go in the summer to find these warblers. And then one that's not quite so bright, the black and white warbler. So I move on now to tanagers. This is the scarlet tanager, which is the more common tanager that can be seen during migration. There is another tanager called the summer tanager, but that's not very commonly seen in Lake County. The bird on the left is the male and the female is yellow. And the bird on the left, I actually photographed through my patio window when I saw it munching on a hornet. Several different types of thrushes. This is a hermit thrush, where you can just about make out the reddish coloration on the tail, which distinguishes it from the very similar looking Swainson's thrush and the wood thrush and the grey cheek thrush. There are lots of different species of sparrow that migrate through, some which do stay in the summer months, such as the song sparrow, which is probably the most common sparrow species in Lake County. The Savannah sparrow on the right does look very similar, but can be distinguished from the song sparrow by the yellow eyebrow that it has. This is a grosbeak. There's actually blue grosbeak as well that can occasionally be seen up at Illinois Beach State Park, although it took me about 3 years to finally see one of these birds. But this is the rose-breasted grosbeak. You will see these birds coming to your feeders, and the male is on the left and it's a female on the right. Dickcissel is a more uncommon bird. This is a grassland bird. You will see them at pine dunes. It's probably the easiest place to see them. There is the odd sighting at Waukegan Beach of these birds. A couple of more grassland bird species. The bobolink that I mentioned earlier, and the eastern meadowlark, which actually nests on the ground. It makes a dome-shaped nest on the ground. You'll probably all be familiar with the red-winged blackbird. It's one of the most common migratory bird species. It's also one of the earliest returning bird species, so I was always glad when I saw the first one of these each year, which is around February, late February, March. So it kind of signaled the end of winter was on the way. And these birds are very territorial. So they will defend their nests quite aggressively. So it's best not to go too close to them if you see them flying at you. A very beautiful bird, the Baltimore Oriole. The female is shown at the top here and the male is at the bottom. They actually nest in trees and they make hanging nests, which are woven out of fibers. And here you can see they actually like to eat grape jelly. Here you can see the male feeding a recent fledgling. This is orchard oriole, which is not as common as the Baltimore oriole. This is a male on the right, and the females do look similar to this bird, which is actually a juvenile bird. You can just see the black coming through and the chestnutty brown coming through. So I'm now going to talk about my monitoring experiences. So the Purple Martin Conservation Association is dedicated to the conservation of purple martins, and it has Project Martin Watch, which is a citizen science project, which is continent-wide, and they use the data to study purple martin populations over time. The purple martins migrate from South America, a lot of them from Brazil, and they return back probably early May to Lake County and then return again in August back to South America. So martins are the largest member of the swallow family, and over 1 million people put up houses for purple martins, but not all people can attract breeding purple martins. They have very specific aerial space requirements, and they need the houses to be near water as well. But if you do attract breeding martins, they will come back to your site every year. And I used to monitor the house that was at Old School Forest Preserve. So martins lay an egg every day up to 7 days until they have between 1 and 7 eggs. And then they hatch when they're 16 to 24 days old. And the hatching can be staggered over 48 hours, so you will get different fledging over a couple of days. And the fledging happens when they're between 26 and 35 days. And the nestlings can be aged by their size. So these photos show 1, 4, 5, and 10-day-old nestlings. When the nestlings are about 10 days old, you have to change the nests. And this is because they become infested with blowfly larvae, which can make the chicks anemic. So we have to take the trays out and put them into fresh nests. And this really helps with the breeding success. Here you can see a photo from a nest change day where the nestling is wearing a dragonfly hat. And these birds, a lot of people think they eat mosquitoes, but they're mainly larger insects such as dragonflies and moths. And I used to have just one house at old school, but there was it was really successful when we started monitoring the houses. So there was an increase from 18 in 2014 fledglings up to 30 the next year, then 43, 48, 68. And the final year before I left, we had 75 birds fledge. And we actually put up a second house with some of the board members and my husband in 2017 because we ran out of space in the first house. And here's one of my favorite photos. It was actually really hard to leave these birds. I was so attached to them after monitoring for them for so many years. So I did some monitoring of birds at Waukegan Beach. You may have heard of Monty and Rose, the piping plovers that nested at Montrose Beach. But what you may not know is actually they were our plovers first, and they did actually nest at Waukegan Beach in 2018. And this shows Monty. And here is Rose. Unfortunately, they decided to nest in the gravel parking lot, which was, considering their plumage, they thought was great. They did blend in, but unfortunately, we had people doing donuts in the car park, and the eggs had to be salvaged by the IDNR. They were taken to the research centre where the 3 of them did hatch and 1 did make it to be released. Also monitored common terns at Waukegan Beach. So in 2017, Waukegan Beach was the only place in the whole of Illinois where these endangered birds attempted to nest. Here you can see them nesting in the dunes. 3 birds sat on nests here. And the area was roped off to protect to protect the birds from human disturbance. Here you can see a courtship display between the birds where one's feeding a fish. Sadly, the nesting attempts over a couple of years were not successful, and this was due to skunks getting in and eating the eggs. And we did put up electric fencing, but that got shorted out by a big storm. But these birds do now nest on a floating platform at the Great Lakes Naval Base. So I'm now going to move on to the final part of my talk, which is to talk about how you can help migratory birds. You may have seen a study that came out, I think it was the year before last, that showed 2.9 billion birds have disappeared since 1970. And this is due to habitat loss, predation, pesticides, climate change, other factors. And Cornell and ABC actually came out with a list of things that you could do to help birds. And I'm actually going to talk about some of these in more detail in a moment. But what I want to mention on here is drinking coffee. So you can actually buy bird-friendly coffee. And the shade-grown coffee doesn't destroy the forest's habitat, and it's beneficial to the farmers and the birds. So how can you help the birds in your yard? Well, there's several different ways that you can do this. Food, of course, is the most obvious way. And this will help resident birds, but also you can actually put out other types of food for the migratory birds. So it's best to put out sunflower seed and safflower seed. If you use the cheaper bird food mixes that have millet in, then you'll probably attract house sparrows, which you don't really want to do. Suet is very good for attracting woodpeckers. And here are the migratory bird species. So planting native plants is a great way to feed bees as well as birds. You can actually put out nectar feeders for hummingbirds and orioles. Please don't buy the shop bought food that you can get for these birds, because the nectar that's in these shop bought ones has red dye in it, which can be harmful to the birds. So just make up your own nectar, and there's a recipe for this on the Audubon website. Orioles like grape jelly, as I mentioned earlier, but you can also put out oranges for them as well, and grapes. Water is very good to supply birds, so they not only drink it in it, but they like to bathe in it too. Brush piles can provide shelter and a place for birds to hide from predators. And if you have a cat, please keep it inside, because cats actually kill around 3.7 billion birds every single year. And it's actually much safer for your cat to be inside too. Nest boxes are great for birds like bluebirds and resident birds as well. Screech owls can be attracted to nest boxes, or even mailboxes like this one in the picture here. Or you can put up platforms for the larger owls. Around 1 billion birds die every year from colliding with windows. And you can actually buy these UV decals, which I found really helped cut down the number of bird collisions. And you can go to these couple of websites here to get information on these. Chicago was actually found to be one of the most deadly cities. So as I said earlier, most birds migrate at night. And they're drawn to the lights in the buildings, and they actually collide with the buildings. So there is a Lights Out Chicago program and many other Lights Out Chicago Lights Out programs over the US. And the Chicago Bird Collision Monitors actually go around during migration, collecting any birds that are injured, take them to be rehabilitated, or any of the dead birds they take to the Field Museum. Finally, you can do your bit to help birds in Waukegan and help protect the habitat of the special Waukegan beach. So in 2018, Waukegan was the first city in Illinois to proclaim 2018 as the year of the bird. And the next year, the Sharing Our Shore program was started, which is a partnership between the city and Lake County Audubon. And the goals are to monitor the bird species, increase public awareness for bird conservation at Waukegan Beach. And you can become a Plover Pal. You will get one of these cool patches. And there is a public outreach program and various different events that are going on. We're always looking for new volunteers for people to help in case that we get any plovers coming to nest. So please contact Lake County Audubon if you're interested in helping out with this program. Finally, a couple of websites, Lake County Audubon, of course, eBird that I mentioned earlier, and also the Forest Preserve as well, if you're interested in visiting any of the areas that I talked about. And now is the time to shout out any questions.
Okay, so this is the end of the presentation. If you have questions, please place them in the chat box. Right now we have a lot of comments like, thanks, Emma, great program. Thanks, Emma, I too am an owl fanatic. We have had, keeps popping up. We've had 3 broods over the past 4 years right by my house, great horned owls. Wonderful program, Emma. So good to see you. Wow.
Thank you.
Mention that you can take the Plover Pledge if you're interested.
Mhm.
So thank you for everyone that told us that you were sharing a screen. That's very important.
Emma, thank you very, very much for doing this. And we hope we can do another one down the road. We'll try to do it on a Saturday afternoon so you can be at an earlier time of day, maybe.
That would be good, yeah.
But it's excellent. And remind people that I know some people signed on late on here, and I know your parents want to see this too. So it will be on the YouTube channel under Lake County Audubon Society, Illinois. So that's
Okay.
where you will find it down the way. And you can look at, Emma, you probably want to look at some more of those chat. There's people talking to you. But
Have a look here.
that was excellent, excellent.
If someone asked Emma, what is your favorite bird that is not an owl?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think if I was in the UK, probably my favorite one would be a green woodpecker. It's one of the more striking colored birds. It's obviously green, but also has green and red coloration. So it's a very pretty looking woodpecker. In the US, it's really hard. I'd probably have to say the purple martin and the bluebird. Although if you asked me on a different day, I'd probably come up with a different answer because there's just so many that I loved.
Yeah, that's neat. You know, you might mention a couple of predators you have that we don't have that are more prevalent there. Like I believe a martin is more prevalent there. The animal, the martin.
Oh, the pine martin, yeah. They're not around in my area, but I think up in Scotland, the pine martins, yeah, they're quite a common predator. We also have, they're not really predators of birds, but animals that we have that you don't have is the badger that can be seen in the countryside here, and foxes are quite common. I think probably more common than what I used to see in my yard in the US. But actually, the crows here can be predators of young birds. My neighbor had robins nesting in her hedge. She was horrified the other day. She called me over because the crow had actually flown in there and tried to take the whole nest with all the babies in there, tried to fly off with it. All the babies fell out, and there was actually one on my lawn that I had to pick up and hand back to her to put back in the hedge. So that wasn't very nice. We also get magpies over here that do the same thing as well.
So it'd be great when you are able to join a group and lead some bird walks in England, and or be led. But you might explain to people you're a little ways away from some of these areas.
Yeah.
That being out in a farmland area. So it's
yeah, I'm out in the countryside, so surrounded by cows.
And we all love cowbirds, right? But thank you again. I think you'll see some other comments on there if you look in the chat, and then
yeah, thank you everyone for the lovely comments, and it was so great to see you. I have missed everyone, and it was really nice to do this and see some of you again.
yeah.
But I do need to sleep now, I think. It's 25 to 1.
Well, we haven't had dinner here yet, so it's
all right.
Thank you again, and we'll hope to meet again on Zoom, on a Zoom meeting or whatever.
Yeah, and when travel is allowed, please let me know, and I can do you a bird walk in the northwest of England.
Very good, very good. Thank you. And thank you, Victor, and hosting it again. And we appreciate it for sure.
Okay,
Yes, thank you,
for coming,
Victor.
everyone. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Right.
Bye, Emma.
Bye.
Well,
Bye.
good to see you.
Bye,
Emma.
Val, Susan. Bye.
Great to see you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Sleep
We
well.
miss you.
We miss you too.